and gentlemen, the son of John Bonham, Jason Bonham. Ladies and gentlemen, from Heart, Ann and Nancy Wilson. Paul Stanley, the iconic Kiss frontman, has always credited Led Zeppelin for inspiring his music career. Reflecting on the band's profound impact, Stanley shared at the premiere of Becoming Led Zeppelin, "I wouldn't be here without them. I wouldn't be who I am without them." He recalled seeing Zeppelin perform live in 1969, an experience that shaped his vision of greatness. "When you see greatness, it inspires you," Stanley said, noting how Zeppelin's performance set a high bar for musical excellence, much like an athlete striving to reach the peak of their sport. Stanley also reminisced about a particularly memorable concert at the New York State Pavilion in 1968, where he witnessed Zeppelin play to a crowd of under 2,000 people. "It was like a religious experience," he said. To him, the band embodied the perfect blend of music and sexuality. He viewed them as the epitome of rock and roll, with their sound drawing from a deep history of musical influences, from Robert Johnson to Elvis, amplified through powerful Marshall amps. For Stanley, moments like seeing Led Zeppelin perform on The Ed Sullivan Show were defining milestones. It was a revelation that left him thinking, "I'll never be that good."
After further discussion with the band and their new manager, Peter Grant, that name became arguably one of the best band names ever, Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin played their first gig with the new name at the University of Surrey in Battersea on October 25th. The band also created their own company, Super Hype, to handle publishing rights. After touring the United Kingdom, their new tour manager, Richard Cole, set up their first North American tour. While on that tour, Atlantic released their self-titled debut album. First released on January 12, 1969, it demonstrated the band's fusion of blues and rock and something else entirely. A new genre, something later just simply referred to as, quote, hard rock. The iconic artwork featured an image of the burning Hindenburg airship of the Hindenburg disaster, first photographed by Sam Shear on May 6, 1937. The album was an immediate commercial hit, but got poor reviews at first. Rolling Stone magazine, in particular, ripped it. Because of the negative attention from the press at first, the band generally avoided talking to the press again throughout their career. I think music critics didn't know how to respond to it, honestly.
Guess you guys aren't ready for that yet. But your kids are gonna love it.
In fact, Rolling Stone later praised the album. The band did release a single off it, Good Times, Bad Times, which was also the opening track. Other standout tracks that ended up on the radio anyway were Dazed and Confused and Communication Breakdown. Their self-titled debut is now considered one of the greatest albums of all time. Led Zeppelin spent the majority of 1969 touring relentlessly to promote the album. That year, they completed 4 UK tours and 4 American tours. They wrapped up recording in August, and Atlantic first released the album, called simply Led Zeppelin 2, on October 22nd, 1969. Rock radio stations played the heck out of Whole Lotta Love, but it was 5.5 minutes long, so pop stations avoided playing it. Atlantic was like, guys, let's edit this sucker down so pop stations will play it. The band was like, nah. But eventually they gave in, and Atlantic edited it down to 4 minutes, and it became a huge hit after that, reaching number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, and reaching the top 10 on several other music charts around the world. But yeah, Led Zeppelin 2 was a commercial success, but got mixed reviews by music critics.
But your kids are gonna love it.
Some later even called it the first popular, quote, heavy metal album. Other standout songs on it included What Is and What Should Never Be, Ramble On, The Lemon Song, and Heartbreaker. By the beginning of 1970, Led Zeppelin was no longer playing clubs and ballrooms. They were playing in huge auditoriums. Some of these early shows lasted more than 4 hours, and the band rarely played songs the exact same way. Offstage, the band's behavior became crazier and crazier. They were certainly known to party hard, and that old sex, drugs, and rock and roll trope applied to them. Alcohol was the main drug, but the band later on also consumed heroin and cocaine. In May and June 1970, Page and Plant took a retreat to write a bunch of new songs at a remote cottage in Wales called, well, I'm not going to even try to pronounce that. Anyway, these songs were more acoustic-based, influenced by both folk and Celtic music. They recorded at various studios throughout the year. Much of these songs ended up on their third studio album, called simply Led Zeppelin 3. Hey, notice a pattern here? First released by Atlantic on October 5th, 1970. Fans were generally extremely excited for its release, but surprised to hear the different direction the band went in. While the biggest hit off of it, Immigrant Song, was definitely hard rock, and similar to most of the stuff on the first two albums, most of the rest of Led Zeppelin 3 was much more chill, and critics generally were more welcoming of the change. By the way, the B-side of Immigrant Song, Hey Hey What Can I Do, ended up becoming a pretty big hit later on as well. The band didn't tour as much to promote Led Zeppelin 3 and ended up turning down a lot of big opportunities, retreating once again to, that place, to write more songs. Meanwhile, Led Zeppelin was becoming not only the most popular, but the most influential band in the world. And they were about to become even bigger after the release of their fourth studio album, which never officially had a title, by the way. They recorded it from December 1970 to February 1971 at Basing Street Studios in London, but mostly at a country house in Hampshire, England, using the famous Rolling Stones mobile studio. After noticing a dog that hung around the country house, Page and Jones named a new song they wrote Black Dog. They also recorded a little song called Stairway to Heaven. Okay, well, not so little. Clocking in at just over 8 minutes, the song eventually became one of the most popular and iconic rock songs of all time. For this album, guest musicians like Ian Stewart came out to help record. Atlantic released the untitled album on November 8th, 1971. Based on what their first three albums were called, fans ended up calling it Led Zeppelin 4. It was an absolute smash success. This time, even critics loved it. Eventually, it became the band's best-selling album, with an estimated more than 37 million copies shipped worldwide. Radio stations played the heck out of Stairway to Heaven. In fact, even though the band never released it as a single, it eventually became the most requested song on FM radio stations in the United States in the 1970s. The band did release 2 singles from Led Zeppelin 4, the aforementioned Black Dog and Rock and Roll. Other notable songs from the album include Misty Mountain Hop and When the Levee Breaks. Well, shoot, that's most of the album. It was basically a greatest hits album, okay? In 1972, the band once again hit the road, now as the biggest band in the world, and playing stadiums and sports arenas. They returned to Japan after touring there the previous year. They also toured Australia and New Zealand for the first time. This was when their tales of rock star excess became infamous, whether they were true or not. You know, tales like John Bonham riding his Harley Davidson down the halls of a fancy hotel. Meanwhile, the band recorded new songs at various studios, including one at Mick Jagger's house, that ultimately made up their 5th studio album, Houses of the Holy, released by Atlantic on March 28, 1973. Although it received mixed reviews from critics, the album was another commercial hit, eventually selling millions and reaching the top of the charts. It featured the hits Over the Hills and Far Away, The Ocean, Dancing Days, and Dire Maker, with Houses of the Holy, the band had continued to experiment and expand their style, even dabbling in funk and reggae influences, for crying out loud. After its release, the band shattered box office records previously held by the Beatles, playing huge tours once again throughout Europe and North America. They played to 56,800 at Tampa Stadium in Tampa, Florida. They played 3 sold-out shows at Madison Square Garden in New York City, and all 3 were filmed for a future motion picture. More on that later. A major bummer during it, though, was right before the final night's performance, more than $1 million, adjusted for inflation, was stolen from the band's safe deposit box at the Drake Hotel. The money was never recovered, and obviously it made Peter Grant very, very angry.
The money is reportedly the largest amount ever taken from a hotel safe deposit box in New York City.
Oh, I forgot to mention that they toured that year in a giant plane. Yep, a former Boeing 720 passenger jet called the Starship. In the fall of 1973, the band took a bit of a break before heading back to the studio. However, there were many delays. First, John Paul Jones wanted to quit the band, but Peter Grant talked him into staying. Really, Jones and the rest of the band just needed time off. While most of 1974 was quiet for the band, they did create their own record label that year called Swan Song Records. Atlantic Records, however, negotiated to still distribute their stuff. The first album to be released by Swan Song was their 6th studio album, Physical Graffiti, released on February 24th, 1975. It was actually a double album, featuring not only songs recorded in 1974, but songs recorded in previous years, going back all the way to 1970. It was probably their most diverse album yet, and was another commercial success, eventually selling more than 16 million copies, their second biggest selling album ever, and debuted at #1 on the UK album charts. Critics also generally loved it. Plant later expressed that Physical Graffiti represented Led Zeppelin at its creative peak. That said, you won't hear most of these songs on classic rock radio stations today. The biggest hit was probably Kashmir, but even that song became bigger much later on. Basically, Physical Graffiti didn't need to be a radio-friendly album. Everyone loved it anyway, and it caused the rest of the band's discography to re-enter the charts, by the way. They returned to the Starship for another major North American tour. In May, the band played 5 sold-out shows at London's Earl's Court Arena, which at the time was the largest arena in Britain. In the fall, they planned on touring again, but had to cancel after Plant and his wife, Maureen, got in a major car crash while vacationing in Greece. If it weren't for a blood transfusion, Maureen would have died. Swan Song released their 7th studio album, Presence, on March 31st, 1976. Most music critics these days say it's the band's weakest album, but it still received solid reviews at the time. It definitely still demonstrated that the band wasn't done experimenting, as seen with the single Candy Store Rock, which one music critic described as a mix of Buddy Holly and David Bowie, and I think that's a perfect way to describe it. While Presence did debut at #1 on both the American and UK album charts, sales had gone significantly down compared to their previous few releases. This may have been since they didn't tour to support the album. Instead, the band took all that footage from the 1973 Madison Square Garden shows and turned it into a movie called The Song Remains the Same. I highly recommend it for a glimpse into not only the band at its creative peak and popularity peak, but a glimpse into what life was like for them behind the scenes at the time. Warner Brothers released it on October 20th, 1976, and it ended up making $12 million at the box office. Swan Song also released a live soundtrack album to complement the movie. It hit the top of the music charts as well. In the spring of 1977, Led Zeppelin finally was able to go back on tour. However, they didn't tour in their home country to avoid paying taxes. In the United States, though, they continued to break attendance records. 76,229 fans attended their show at the Silverdome in Pontiac, Michigan, the most ever for a single-act show up to that point. And indeed, the public didn't hear much from them over the next year. By September 1978, though, the band was itching to get back to making music. When they did get together, they went crazy with the experimentation this time, especially Jones with his synthesizers. At the end of the year, they recorded some new songs at Polar Studios in Stockholm, Sweden. These songs were definitely much different than most earlier Led Zeppelin stuff. In particular, they were less heavy. You could say more built for pop radio, actually. Although the band wasn't completely satisfied with the new stuff, they released what would become their 8th and final studio album, In Through the Outdoor, on August 15th, 1979. It was another commercial success, hitting the top of the music charts in several countries. It also featured 2 pretty big hits, Fool in the Rain and All My Love, which was a tribute to Plant's son who had died. While In Through the Outdoor also went on to sell millions, critics were generally more, critical of it. Not only that, but many longtime Led Zeppelin fans were disillusioned by the new sound. 1979 also saw the band returning to the stage. They played a total of 4 shows in August. Big ones. They had 104,000 fans in the audience at the first show of the Knebworth Music Festival. Still, by this time, both Jimmy Page and John Bonham had struggled greatly with their addiction to drugs. Page was using too much heroin, and Bonham was drinking too much alcohol. In June 1980, the band once again toured Europe, playing some more low-key shows. The June 27th show in Nuremberg, Germany, came to a halt in the middle of the 3rd song when Bonham passed out on stage and had to be rushed to the hospital. Many assumed excessive drug use was the cause. That would be the band's final tour. They had planned on returning for another tour in North America, but Bonham died on September 25th, 1980, after consuming around 40 shots of vodka while rehearsing with the band at Jimmy Page's house. He had choked on his own vomit after passing out. Page, Plant, and Jones decided the band could not go on without Bonham. They issued a statement in December that said, quote, "We wish it to be known that the loss of our dear friend and the deep sense of undivided harmony felt by ourselves and our manager have led us to decide that we could not continue as we were. It was over."
The name of the documentary, Becoming Led Zeppelin, will explore the band's origins and meteoric rise to success with never-before-seen footage and commentary directly from the band. All 4 members, including an unheard interview with drummer John Bonham, will be shown during the film and also include unseen footage from the band's earliest live performances. As the title, Becoming Led Zeppelin, suggests, this documentary will not cover the band's entire career and end, but instead focus on the band's formation and how their first albums and tours changed both music history and the lives of each member of the band. As promoted in the trailer, the film will be the first authorized documentary from the band where the members of Led Zeppelin get to set the record straight in their own words. According to the producers of the film, fans can expect unseen film footage, photographs, and music recordings that haven't seen the light of day in over 50 years. The news of all of this has come as a huge surprise for Zeppelin fans, as the documentary originally premiered at the Venice Film Festival in 2021, but was later pushed back from its theatrical release after it had been revealed that there were production issues that needed to be taken care of before its official release. Sony Picture Classics, which acquired the film earlier this year, plans to release Becoming Led Zeppelin only in IMAX at select theaters on February 7th, 2025. The idea to release the film using the cinematic power of IMAX, paired with the film's authentic sound, creates an immersive and transportive viewing experience that will make these 55-year-old clips and music look and sound like they just got made yesterday. According to the director of the film, fans can also expect unseen footage from the band's 1969 concerts at the Atlanta Pop Festival, the Fillmore West, and the Texas Pop Festival for the first time ever. Jimmy Page even said during an interview about why hasn't a Led Zeppelin documentary come out sooner was because all of the Led Zeppelin film ideas that have been pitched to him have always been lightweight and have never explored the band's creative process behind the band's albums or the band's different live improvisations on tour, and that fans can expect that and much more with the release of this new documentary. I hope we can also get a look inside the band's creative process and what exactly was the driving inspiration behind the band's first few albums. I also hope we can get a documentary similar to how the Beatles had Get Back in 2021, where we get to see the inner workings of the band with photos and footage. I just find it so exciting that we can finally hear what the band has to say about their story, and I can't wait to hear that unreleased interview from John Bonham, and I hope we can get some footage from Headley Grange or Brun Rar, where the band made their first few albums. At the same time, I'm sort of bummed out that we won't be hearing anything about the making of the band's later albums and tours, and how they won't talk about John Bonham's passing.
Hey you, don't miss out our next video. Hit that subscribe button for exclusive videos and join our awesome community and enjoy. Subscribe now!